down in the dark hills of southern West Virginia, just west of War and Berwyn. Runs all the way to the Virginia border is a place called Slate Creek. Slate Creek is one of the most beautiful places on earth. It's a place that's full of natural history, all the way back to Native Americans, where many artifacts have been found there. A place that had farmers, moonshiners, loggers. Matter of fact, there used to be an old train that used to run through just to haul the logs out of there. An old camp that was full, that had a huge kitchen that fed all the loggers back in the day. And also, a lot of old hillbillies, they were called. Country people that lived there. There was even a place there where the Union Army tracked a man down and shot him and killed him. But also, the cabin where my father was raised and his father lived. I was even raised most of the time on Slate Creek. But now I want to tell you a story about coon hunting. A story about a spring and a cup. Stay tuned. The Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, Kentucky. As mysterious as they are beautiful. What you see behind me here, that's a hollow. That's a place where back in the day people would live with no roads. The only access to get in would maybe be with a horse and a sled. Had to pipe in sunshine because certain months of the year the sun wouldn't even hit. Mysterious places. Places that where we only hear stories about and we can't imagine these places would even exist. Let me tell you more. In deep, mysterious places where things could hide and maybe hide for 100 years and nobody would ever see them. The only thing that remained behind were old paths, kind of like this one, where they would use a horse and pull a cart through the woods, and maybe an old fireplace, and maybe the springs where they got their water from. Places, 100, 200 years ago, or even back 1,000 years ago, whenever the Native Americans were living in this area. Spring sort of like this one. So you got out in the woods and you traveled around, and when you come up to a little water hole, beside the spring you'd find a cup, just an old vegetable can or some type, and you get out in the woods and you see this cup and you think, well, the water must be pretty good because people have been drinking here before, so you just rinse the cup out a little bit and you got you a drink. See, it was just such a spring that one night back in the 1970s, in a place called Slate Creek, way up in Slick Rock, and my dad and Troy and Claude had been out hunting, and they were so tired. They really didn't know where they was. They just knew that they were somewhere in the area. See, back in the 1970s, if you lived in Shop Hollow, one thing you done is you coon hunted. You went to church, you prayed, you served God, you played horseshoes, and you coon hunted. And that's why Dad had old Mel and Claude had Julie and just great hunting dogs. So they was out hunting that night. They were tired. So when they came up on the spring and they were thirsty. And the dogs were tired also, so the dogs that came into where they was at. So whenever they reached down, found the cup. So this must be pretty good water because they got a drinking cup here, and they kind of just, you got to kind of move around, and what they call drugs, the different bugs and everything is in the water, and you moved it to the side and rinsed it out and got you a little bit more. And when they started to drink from the water, a noise come up out of the cup that sounded like someone was choking a horse. And when when Dad started drinking, he heard that and he threw it down. And he looked around and nobody else heard it. He was the only one that heard it, and he couldn't understand why that noise was there. So maybe it was a bird, maybe it was one of the dogs. Didn't know what it was, and nobody else was doing anything. So he got the cup again, and he reached down, and he started taking a drink, and out of this cup come this noise, sounded just like someone was choking a horse, and he looked, and the noise was coming from the trees, and then the dogs ran to him, and Troy ran to him, and the next thing he knew, they were up in a tree looking down, trying to get away from this sound, and it just stopped. They didn't know where the sound was coming from. They didn't know what it was, but the sound just stopped. And they got back down just baffled of what was making all this noise. They couldn't figure out what was making all this noise. And Troy looked at Dad, and Dad looked at Troy and said, "What is this noise?" And they looked over at Claude, and Claude never heard a thing. They didn't hear a thing, and the sound come from the cup, from the trees. The dogs were scared. The dogs were trying to get up the tree with them, and nobody knew what this noise was. Even to this day, nobody knows what had happened in the spring. What had happened with this cup? What had happened there? Maybe 100 years before, maybe 50 years before, maybe 500 years before. What had happened at this spring? But all of a sudden, that sound come back. No doubt, it was time to go home. No doubt, they got the dogs. We're leaving here. Claude still hadn't heard nothing. They said, "We're leaving here. We're getting out of here." And they went all the way to the house, still wondering what the sound was that they heard coming from the mysterious spring on Main Creek and Slate Creek. Wow. What in the world was that? And see, Dad and Troy was trying their best to explain to Claude what they heard, and Claude just shaking his head. Maybe you're trying to pull a joke on me. We haven't heard anything, but it scared them so bad it made the blood boil just about and run cold even. And they was up in a tree trying to escape whatever the sound was that was coming from the cup in the spring. Something in there was making all this noise. Nobody knows what it was. If you want to hear more stories, like this video. If you want to hear more stories, share this and follow us. And hopefully we'll tell you a whole lot more stories of the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia and Kentucky.